Welcome to Automation Caffeine, your dose of invigorating business automation tips packed with interesting anecdotes and questions. We have a different guest every episode from various industries, countries, and backgrounds for a half-hour online chat over coffee. My name is Jesse. I'm the co-founder of Trigger. I'm a serial entrepreneur, but above all, I'm a coffee snob. And today I'm joined by Max Easton, the Global Innovation Director at Smartex, which supplies artificial intelligence solutions for the textile industry. Hi, Max.
Hello.
Hey, as you know, we always ask our guests to introduce themselves in a, as you correctly said, three-thing intro, but I call it a three-word intro. But please, your three-word intro. Who is Max?
Who is Max? I won't go English. So my three will be an optimist and driven to make systems better, someone who spends all his money on interior design, and the third has to be having come from a hospitality family that good food and drink is the foundation of a happy life. It's a belief and something I follow.
Is that a Italian background somehow or something? Like it sounds
No,
very
no, no.
like Mediterranean.
Yeah, it does. It does. No, it's my mom has she started different restaurant chains and gastropubs in her
Oh,
career. So
wow.
food and drink has always been a big part of our family.
Yeah, cool. And what's the latest thing that you've bought interior design wise?
So I found a very good Dutch carpenter. I live in Amsterdam, and he just makes such incredible stuff. So the latest thing was some very nice long shelves made out of oak in the living room,
Oh,
which are just gorgeous and free floating. And yeah,
great. That is fantastic. Cool. Yeah. I also love interior design. It's something that we could probably spend hours talking about, but that's not what we're here for today.
no.
We're here to talk a little bit about Smartex and the solution that you guys have. Can you explain a little bit to the audience what exactly it is that Smartex does in your words?
Yeah. So Smartex is in the supply chain of the textile industry, a very hidden part, but a huge, huge supply chain. And we basically add with a hardware software solution that puts cameras in machines that produce fabric, specifically at this point, knitted fabric, so things like t-shirts, pajamas, underwear, but soon also other fabrics like wovens, so things like shirts and things. And we put those cameras in, and they basically just take tons of photos of all the fabric that's being produced. And using our machine learning algorithm, we can spot defects. And based on the quality criteria of the factory, we can stop those defects, stop the machine, tell them the worker what's the problem, they fix it, and good fabric production continues. So stopping big problems that cause even bigger problems downstream. Yeah, we now also offer a service to garment facilities to track the basically like Uber, they track their fabric order to see where it is, and they can also track the quality. And yeah, we've managed to show them that there's a lot of benefits to intervening with better quality control earlier in the supply chain, especially before fabric has dyed, which is very costly and environmentally expensive as well. So yeah, that's basically what we do. Our CEO has a nice expression where he says we're the plumbers of the textile industry, right? We go in, we put internet, we put cameras, we teach them how to use this new technology, we simplify, and the benefits are the fact that you can basically make more garments per kilogram, so you should need less fabric to make the same garments. You have more reliable speed, you have better quality, and then also we're capturing extremely valuable data for basically the sustainable shift, because the area where we operate, this fabric area, is 50% of industry emissions, right? CO2 emissions. So ton plus water and chemicals, but it's huge and it's a black box currently.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, I was very interested in what you told me about the founder because the history of the company comes from this specific process, right? Was it the father or the grandfather of one of the founders who did this by hand? And it was amazing. You said that it still goes the same way, and that's sort of what you're changing, right? You're making it
Yeah,
more.
it's much more efficient. So it's probably a very good point to explain how inspection is currently done
Yeah.
in the industry, and our CEO has a very personal story of this. So currently, inspection is done manually. So it is a human staring at a piece of fabric that is either like the same structure, non-dyed, or dyed. So imagine staring at like a moving wall, and you're looking for defects of many different varieties over an 8-hour shift. And our CEO did this job. His dad basically had a very small textile factory in the north of Portugal. We're a Portuguese company based in Porto, and he did it over the summers. And we're not entirely sure if he wears glasses because of having done this job or it was inevitable, but he hated it. And he basically, when he went to university and met some of his co-founders, a software guy, a hardware guy, and started exploring artificial intelligence, it was the idea of, wait a second, like even if I catch the defect, and like I manage to see it on the inspection machine, the defect's already happened, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we try and put some cameras in a machine that's spinning around to take photos of the fabric right when it's being produced and to stop the machine if a defect's being produced, right? So amazing idea, so hard. It's been 6 years since we kind of like that idea kind of started. Now we have 1,000 systems installed worldwide, and it's really gearing up. But yeah, taking a problem that he faced and coming up with a much better solution.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and because you're also because now you're making it digital, basically, like truly digital. So I once explained to someone, I think in a blog post, this was like when we first started digitizing like contact card information, we type it over, but that's not the same. And then LinkedIn is the way that you would really digitalize this. And that's the same thing that you're doing, because now you're taking advantage of the fact that the data can be copied easily. It can be shared to people. You can open it up. You can
utilize it.
Analysis on it.
Like
utilize. Yeah,
exactly.
You said utilize. Yeah, that's exactly the right word. And I think that's really interesting that opens up, I think, way more possibilities that I assume the industry is only at the start of doing this.
Oh my God. Yeah. Like really. It's such a cool thing going to garment facilities and brands now and their production sourcing teams. And we bring up like either a simplified, kind of chart just showing basically percentage of fabric complete of an order, or the quality of it, or literally going into a roll map and showing them a bad roll and the defects and how we've captured it and we've graded that roll. And they're just like, it's just insane, because the way that people, so a garment facility, when they order fabric, which is the most important part of what they need to then make the garments out of, they are calling these guys every day, or, in the worst, coming to visit, to be like, how's my order going? Is it going to be delivered on time? How's the quality? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like incredibly old school. It's incredibly old school, and it's just the way it's always been done. And it's kind of like, they kind of look at it as like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah. But, the built-in inefficiency that comes out of that is huge, because all these garment facilities basically end up ordering way more fabric than they need, because they don't trust the fabric that's coming in. And they also end up having to air freight a lot, because fabric comes, it's not good enough, they don't have enough garments, they can't fulfill the order. That's the punishment, because the brand's now got empty shelves or whatever else. And so they air freight it, which ruins their margins and is like so much worse for the environment to air freight all these goods everywhere. So it's kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but it's very broke, but they just haven't had a solution to fix it. And so, it's really exciting trying to be on that front edge of changing this industry, but yeah, it takes time. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy.
Yeah, I like also that you described that it covers the entire, let's say, supply chain, or the entire manufacturing chain, from the brand and garment manufacturer on the far end of the process, all the way through to the where you started with actually creating the fabric. And you cover the whole process now, right?
No, we don't cover the whole process. It's the one thing we go from. So the amazing thing about a t-shirt, right? You buy a t-shirt at H&M or Zara, that has been through about 10 different hands or 10 different locations, right? So someone has picked the cotton, for example. Then someone has had to clean the cotton. Then someone, and there are machines at different stages in this, right? That also have kind of advanced. Then somehow, basically you have to kind of, make the cotton into like yarn, right, which is a multi-step process. Then when it's yarn, which you think of it just like kind of thread, or kind of it's something you could sew with, that is then used to make fabric, raw fabric. And that's where we start. So we start when it's the fabric stage. So we intervene when it's raw, when it's being created, when you have a lot of structural defects that are created, like needles going wrong, the wrong yarn being put in, too much oil, holes, all these kinds of things which are irreversible defects. You can't fix a hole, right? You can't fix a needle line for 30 meters.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the dye house, and we track it through the dye house, and then it goes to the garment facility, who makes it into the garments and sells that to the brand. So it's kind of fabric to, we say fabric to the cutting table, where you start cutting the fabric to make it into the garments.
Yeah. Oh, but that's ultimately already, like, that's at least half of the process. And that's so basically from where the value that's being added starts to compound, basically that's where you are entering the process.
Yes.
Because I can imagine that indeed for the people at the end of all the way at the end of the process, there's the biggest business case, I guess.
Exactly. And that's the thing, like our VP of sales is a great way to think about that. You go from talking about kilograms to talking about units. And, some of these guys, they've made 5-6 t-shirts out of a kilogram of finished fabric, right? And those 6 units, like, depending on the brands you're selling to, can be anywhere from like $4 to, $150, $100, and very, very high end. And so but you're going at the backstage where the fabric is, where the raw fabric is produced, it's $5 a kilo.
Oh.
The $5 a kilo to like then $4 or $5 a unit, right? You can see that the margins increase rapidly. And again, when we travel around and you go to big vertical facilities in India or Bangladesh, you go to the poor knitter's office, and he's like got a teeny little office, like a little wiggling fan that hasn't been oiled for years up top. It's hot, it's sweaty. He's like, I don't have any money. What can I do? And then you're like, okay, let me go chat with your garment guys to see how much wastage they have and if it's structural and things like that. And you go to like this, brand new glass building, Porsches are in the driveway, you get met by a lovely receptionist, you go to an air-conditioned room, there's all these sexy brand samples on the side, you're like, fuck, like this, sorry, but this is where the money is, in the industry, right? So, it's the supply chain before garments isn't so pretty. It's very, very industrial and not so aesthetic, and it doesn't have the money to make big investments a lot of the time.
Yeah, and that's where Smartex comes in. It's very clear to me, at least now. Thanks. We always have our wheel of unfortune, and it is time for that. So we'll have it spin and see which question it has in store for you. Here we go.
Okay.
Tell us a painful truth about your industry. Painful truth about your industry. Well, Max.
Yeah.
You've already shared some.
Exactly. I was thinking. So, there's a photo we used to have in some decks. We still sometimes use it, where it shows a photo from, I think it's the end of the 19th century, so like maybe 1890, say 1900. And then there's another photo of like a modern day facility, and they are interchangeable. Despite it's black and white versus color, right? And so I've mentioned it maybe a few times already, but I think the painful truth is this industry hasn't changed a hell of a lot, and there is a reason why when countries historically have wanted to industrialize, from the British, right, all the way to kind of Bangladesh, perhaps is the best example at the moment, they pick textiles first. Because, at least on the garment side, it just takes people. Like, it really just takes people with nimble hand skills, but it just takes people, which nimble hand skills are normally women more than men, and just to basically get the fabric in and make garments and pump them out, right? If you then want to move back into the dyeing and the fabric and stuff, well, that takes a bit more investment and machinery. But again, compared to starting in, automobiles or technology or data centers or, energy, oil, anything like this, it's relatively low investment, and things aren't changing really quickly. You're kind of like, it's passed down from one generation to the next. It's someone's son is running these big textile mills normally, but really the dad holds the purse strings, right? And he's very conservative, and he's like, my way is the works. So it's a $2 trillion industry that just is like old school. And so it's fascinating, and it definitely needs to update. And I think one analogy or story I'll bring in here is in the car industry, for example. There was this great interview like a year ago that I watched like over the last like a month or two ago. There was the CEO of Ford having like the most honest interview like I've ever heard a CEO have, and he was basically just telling how like screwed they were a bit with their current situation against Tesla, because Tesla has introduced this idea of software upgrades to your car, and that being a luxury, and you can have all these fun different features and blah blah blah. And that's now started to become like an assumption. Like now we don't, the Cybertruck, it doesn't actually connect to the wheels. It's software driving it, so you can drive it really quickly, and that's why you have a really small steering wheel. All this stuff is now, software eating the world, now eating cars. And whereas Ford has, he said, I think it was 100 or 150 different lines of code, different providers of code in their vehicle, none of which Ford owns or has written or can edit.
Yeah.
Or probably even understands. And it's like investing $5 billion in Rivian and stuff like that for their code. And so that's something like an industry that's been here for 100 plus years, just shifting rapidly now to this new way of doing business. And if you don't adapt, you're in trouble. And I think the textile industry needs that shock. And I think it is starting to get it with the rise, whatever you feel about it, of Shein, because of the fact that they are now putting software into their supply chain and directly communicating with them, which is speeding everything up and allows them to offer things, fast, cheap, quality, not always great at all, but, basically that's what they managed to, kind of do. And so, they've taken huge market share as a result of it, and H&M and Zara and these other big guys have to watch out. And just that they want to survive and be these stalwarts of the industry. So I think that's a really interesting thing. So the textile industry has not changed for a long, long time, but things are moving quicker, as we all know. Different technologies are combining, like ours, cameras, AI, software, things like that. And it will create pivot points, and I think we'll go faster than people think. And, we write these reports every year talking about the fact that the modern textile factory has to adapt to the new demands of brands of lower prices, faster speed, better quality, and compliance data. And those that don't will not be successful businesses, and it will be just a classic kind of like, kind of changing of the guard. So it's quite interesting seeing that play out in different industries. And we're trying to help our partners be part of the, the kind of first movers, not the laggards.
Yeah, indeed. It sounds like if everything is done manual, there's a huge opportunity, obviously, to introduce data, and Shein is indeed a good example of how they can basically overnight get like something that's starting to trend and get it onto mass manufacturing, which is incredible.
It's 10 days from concept to delivery.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's 10 days. And Zara used to be the leader with that. And I think they had something like, I wrote a report on this last year. I think they were in the 30 days. They got it down to. So and the implication of that, and the reason why they're worth so much money is because their inventory levels are very low. And, the standard inventory levels, you're talking like it takes like 150 days to get through your inventory or 100 days to get through your inventory. That's how they measure it. And Shein is like under 20. I mean, it's like crazy numbers for this industry. And that's why investors are like, oh, we love you. You don't have cash tied up in stock, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, it's a shift.
Yeah, definitely is. If you're watching the show and you have a question for Max, just as a note, you can type it in the comments, and it will show up for us, and we'll pick it up at the end during our Q&A section. Max, you talked about sort of the parts of the system that you have. So it's hardware, it's cameras that you install into the bigger machines. You don't supply your own like big machines, but you actually work with the machines that are available, and you have additions to them. You have the AI algorithms, which I sort of, in my head as a software engineer, I see as a different module. And then you have the platform, which let's say connects these items together, and it provides, I think, let's say the supply chain, the connection between the partners in the supply chain, if I can explain it like that. This is in that way, sort of with the hardware and the AI, it's a deep tech solution, clearly, as you said.
Definitely.
But how is it? Is it a modular one? How are you looking at improving it, or well, improving it? But I can imagine, for example, AI needs to be trained very specifically. So you're looking at cotton; it's going to have a different algorithm for nylon or another fabric, and that's just fabric production. So that's a difficulty that I see. You have to train it for different. Well, maybe it's pre-dye, so not for colors, but definitely for materials. Different manufacturing process already needs new training, so that would be a module. Then the hardware, obviously, I can see that there's many machines in the market. Not everyone uses the same machine, so that's a thing. How modular did you design it, and is there what's the idea between expanding? Because you can also expand, as you said before, in the supply chain. You can go to like to earlier stages maybe of the process. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so it's very modular, the system. We have individual camera modules that we can basically add or subtract depending on the width of the machine. The amount of knitting machines in the market is definitely like a massive pain in the ass, to put it bluntly. But it also creates a barrier for entry, right? And you can be strategic about targeting the ones where our customers and our prospects have the most of, right? And we're starting to partner with these machine manufacturers so that they can actually sell their products with Smartex enabled, kind of like Intel inside or whatever else. And but in terms of, tell me if I missed something, Jesse, but in terms of the question of like, where can we go and everything else, I mean, there's always an ability to go to other roll-to-roll industries, right? But before, paper, steel, anything that basically is manufactured in the roll, right? But before aluminium, as well, and rolls. But before you basically go into that, we are in some 0.0001% of the machines, right, in the textile industry. So and that's in one part of the textile industry, and then there's other fabric types and there's other stages, like you said. So there is a massive, like the TAM is not the problem, in this industry. And so, I think for us, how we view this is, that basically we want to add hardware into the supply chain because that's the only way you get really accurate data. I won't even go into how inaccurate the data currently is on production processes and impact on the supply chain, but it is because it's based on massive global averages and studies, right? Nothing real. And so we obviously have cameras, we have integrations with factories, ERPs. We can absorb a lot of information, and that's only because we are there installing something and helping improve their lives and jobs and work. And because of that, you then basically have a very, very good competitive advantage, right? And something very unique to offer. And I think that concept, if you just look at how we need to improve supply chains because they account for the vast majority of environmental emissions, they account for all, abilities to reduce price, improve speed, improve quality, et cetera, et cetera. Also geopolitically, right? Like where you produce and everything else. You're going to need hardware. You can't do it just with software because you're just basing it off the same data as everyone else. There was no database on fabric defects, right? The only reason we have the world's largest database of fabric defects is because we just taken enough photos of fabric defects being while fabric is produced, right? I think that idea of trying to be an additive piece of hardware to gather, provide value and gather very accurate data and use that to, support decision making, down the line towards the kind of customer or main supplier side is something that can be replicated across probably most industries. And in some cases already has, right? The textile industry is behind in some of these areas for sure, a lot of these areas. So I think that's really interesting. But I think, the hardware piece is hard. It's a pain in the ass. It's expensive. It's low margin. but it gives you the ability to take a position and a much more defensible position that also has much more commercial and sustainable impact, I believe.
Yeah, and because you sell the hardware as like a purchase, not as a lease construction, as part of the entire system, right?
Yeah, we sell it in one, upfront, the kind of fixed amount, which includes 3 years of kind of our platform. And then after, basically, we have these heat press labels. I'll show them to the camera, but I know they're basically heat press labels that replace writing, and they can survive the dyeing process. So that's kind of your recurring revenue stream. And the hardware thing, we would be so open to doing licensing. But another thing about the textile industry is they don't like subscriptions much. So, any kind of like, hey, just, you can pay us when you use it, like on a per kilogram or per roll basis. They love the math, they get the concept, and then they're like, look, I'll buy it straight out. So, it's just their way of doing things. I give you money, you give me something else. We never have to see each other again unless it breaks down, So there's also some business model innovation that needs to eventually go on in the fashion industry.
Yeah, because I think I'm always a big proponent of the lease model. Obviously, I'm in software as a service, so maybe I'm very biased. But but the idea behind it, especially for physical products, is I think it was Mercedes. I read it years ago, where they had this mobility service. You pay X amount per month, and you have a car, and you can switch it for a different one within, obviously, of a certain level of subscription. You can switch around. And what I like about that is that right now, with the current, let's say, the buy once model, as a manufacturer, you're sort of forced, for your revenue, you're forced to introduce new model. You need to make the consumer buy something new. Whereas if you have a subscription model, you're sort of more forced to make sure that your car lasts longer, so that it actually gives more value.
Completely.
That's what I basically love about it. It's far more sustainable if you set it up in the right way in a manufacturing company.
And smarter for the user, right? I mean, you then can upgrade your equipment if there's small upgrades coming, right? Rather than, like being stuck with the old model, right? And we could always take that back, re-engineer it, take things apart, use the goods, the product parts that can be reused. It's just so true. And I think, one area where I see that we can actually start doing that is we're starting to get garment facilities and brands to say, actually, I want Smartex inspected fabric. So I order my normal cotton lycra fabric that I'm making into 10,000 t-shirts, 1,000 t-shirts, whatever it is, this color, this dye, this process. But I want that Smartex inspected. I want it to go to a machine with the Smartex cameras, because we've shown through these pilots we've been running with H&M, in Bangladesh and Portugal, with different big brands and garment facilities, that you just save material cost, you have more reliable speed, better quality, more compliance data, all the stuff we talked about. And so that is creating a top-down, push effect, right? Or like a pull effect from the market, right? The market wants it. And so that's going to create then pressure over time on these fabric mills to install more Smartex, right? And to utilize the technology. Now, again, these guys have very low margins, right? And what we're building the model around is that the garment facility or the brand pays more per kilogram, 5-7 cents, which, by the way, people told us that would never happen. It is happening. They would pay basically more per kilogram, and that's because they basically make 10x the return, right? And that covers the cost and a bit more for all the cost of the knitter. Now, that model I can see building up to, if they want to then install the hardware, especially the cameras and stuff, which are a bit more expensive than, say, the labels, right, and the software, then they pay a bit more per kilogram, and it's like a lease model. So they basically compensate the fabric mill for installing this. The fabric mill pays us on a per kilogram basis, but lower. And so everyone wins, right? Like the knitters getting paid more, their revenue's going up on the same amount of sales, they're upgrading their factory, they're having less wastage, they can maybe go for more upmarket brands. Garment facilities are winning because they're making more garments per kilogram. They, have basically more reliable speed, better quality, they all look better, they can keep an eye on everything. And then the brands win because they can get lower cost, speed, quality, compliance data, right? And so everyone should win. And to be honest, efficiency is a nice place to be. You know, they call it eco-efficiency, right? Because it's like, hey, everybody wins. You know, like, you know, you have some money because you're saving. You have some money. You have some money. So
Yeah.
if you get the structure right, it's an easy pitch. And there are much bigger things that have to come down the road from a sustainability lens that might not have such a sexy pitch, for sure. And that's where you might need legislation or different investment models. But for this one, yeah, I can see the leasing thing happening if there's enough pressure on these fabric mills and they're like, I don't have the cash to pay for this upfront. And we're like, okay, well then why don't you lease it? You know, it actually does better over time. And the garment facility can basically pay for it, you know, for you, right? Because they're paying you more and you just pay us a bit.
Yeah. I think that is, I think for like I said, basically in manufacturing industries, if you can get to this model, I think it benefits everyone in the long run, just from a sustainability point of view. But even as a business model, it just makes sense for people because somehow, and I haven't done the math, but it feels always to me like if you do it well with a lease model, and you get most out of your hardware and don't have to push people to buy new hardware and everything, like you said, you can reuse parts and everything. It just seems like you can get the cost of producing these items lower than you would if you have to push new versions every time.
And the volumes you can push out, right? It's so much more accessible, so then you get economies of scale quicker because you can sell more.
Exactly.
You can iterate more on the hardware. Yeah, I'm with you, Jesse. That's, you know, go tell your local garment facility, you know, and fabric mill, right?
Yes. Let me call my garment facility. I have none. I'm that much outside of this process.
I was too until 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So I get you.
So that brings us to the Q&A. So again, for people, if you have a question to Max, feel free to drop it. Still, we have some questions already. And this one I really liked, and I'm looking forward to your answer. Elena asks, what's the most rewarding part of seeing Smartex technology in action, Max? What is
great question.
Elena.
So, I mean, I'll give two answers. One, I'll say, obviously, it's gratifying, right? Whenever something you go through all these tough times and you know, putting everything and rejections and whatever else, when you see it in action, when you see a factory that understands it and uses it effectively, like we have some that are just like, you walk in, you're like, oh, guys, and they're doing it better than we even imagined and coming up with new ideas. That's, I mean, it's always going to give a thrill, and I get a massive thrill out of that. The second part, I suppose, is that I know we are building something that you know, this industry in the world needs, right? Which is basically the ability to understand what the F is going on in the supply chain, because there is no transparency in the textile supply chain right now. And so, you know, I know that commercial success of Smartex, of factories using this well and enjoying it and getting benefits, means that we are in the background. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, loud and proud. We are reducing wastage and we are capturing fantastic primary data that will unlock more sustainable investment later on, because people will see, shit, that guy has a much lower impact than this guy. And it's like, yeah, because he's invested in the newer machinery and he insulates everything, has better efficiency.
Yeah.
And when you create that understanding, you can then shift sourcing patterns and incentives. So that also gives me a huge amount of gratification, because I am here actually, I think, you know, in terms of my values, primarily for the impact. But you got to let capitalism do its thing, right? And you got to find out how to make the incentives right that people do it by mistake.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that is very true. Yeah, you have to use capitalism in sort of its. I think it's like binoculars. It sort of like gets that point far away closer, fast. That's sort of the engine behind capitalism. But yeah, you have to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And yeah, we sometimes don't get the right track. Like we get these new technologies or things in, and then they're not sustainable. So now we have to focus on that. But in the end, yeah, that's basically the goal. We have to point it there and then make it work so that the prices go down. That's basically it. So everyone can do this. That's
and I could depress us all right now, but I will share the thing that I still haven't got an answer to, which is ultimately in the short term and the medium term, this is the right direction. The question that we still haven't asked is, it's a means to an end. What is that end? And there's a very depressing paradox that was started by this guy called Jevon. His surname's, I forget his last name. He's like, of course, English. I feel very, patriotic now. It was basically a thinker from the 19th century, and he was studying basically steam and steam engines and basically coal consumption. And he noticed that as steam engines became more and more efficient, coal consumption actually went up, like total coal consumption.
Yeah.
And the thing is I believe you have to have as efficient industries as possible to then try and electrify them and cut out waste, blah blah blah. But the Jevons paradox thing is that actually, as you make something more efficient, you end up increasing the use of that resource. And that is something that I don't think anyone has really been able to give me a satisfactory answer on. That I'm still trying to work out of how you do it, because there's a reason why fast fashion exists. It's because we've become efficient enough where we can make these goods as cheap as possible. It's actually because they just outsourced it to newly developing countries and blah blah blah. But there is always basically a profit efficiency, which is we actually use more of the resource. So if anyone has an answer for that or a good counter, I'd be fascinated, because I discuss it with a lot of people because I don't know how to answer it yet.
Yeah, that is a really good point on the absolute numbers. They just go up. Yeah. That ties nicely in with this one, I think. So Jeroen asks, do you think consumer awareness of supply chain transparency will influence innovation efforts in the future? So this sort of points a little bit in maybe like CSRD type legislation, where this transparency is more, let's say, demanded of companies at some point, I guess. What do you think? Will that be something for
So I think consumers, I try not to give consumers too much responsibility over this, because I think it's very tricky when most consumers just don't have that much money and they just want something, and it's for their own lives, and how do they fit into this bigger picture, especially with how good marketing has got to get deep into our minds. But I think one thing that's maybe interesting is that Xinjiang cotton, right, which is from China. I actually don't know exactly the history of where that started to come, but obviously, basically, countries then started banning it, right? In the US, so they cannot have Xinjiang cotton in any product sold in this market, otherwise we'll hold it at port. Now, obviously, that was started from a grassroots movement. It must have been from grassroots movements of people making people aware, campaigning, blah blah blah, and then it led to this. And so that has driven innovation, because there's this company called Oritain that has shot to the moon because of this, because New Zealand-based company, they can basically take anything, like a t-shirt, a piece of fabric, whatever, put it in their labs and tell you where that cotton was grown.
Wow.
It's so badass. And so that basically, they have every single brand that ever sells in the US, buying their stuff, because otherwise their product gets held at port, and that's a lot of money and a lot of wasted effort and resources and empty shelves and lost sales and blah blah blah. And it's not cheap, this, by the way.
Yeah.
That's one of the plays they have, but it's a great technology and it works. So in that sense, I'm linking activism to governments changing policy to then innovation driving forward. So yeah, governments, in democracies, at the end of the day, governments have to listen if there's a large swell of people, and that can lead to rule changes, which then can lead to innovation. But I think ultimately, consumer demand for lower prices and more speed and better quality, whatever else, is also driving innovation in a different way, because textile factories will not be able to manage in their current setup.
Yeah. I think that consumers are. There was this chain in the Netherlands that recently went bankrupt, and they had this lady interviewed on TV. It was really funny. And she's like, she was going in for I don't know, like a doormat or something. And she comes out and they ask her and did you buy the doormat? She's like, no, because at this other store it was way more cheap. It was half the price. I was like, yeah, that's what it comes down to. She's like, yeah, I really hate the store to not be here anymore, because it's been there for 100 years. But then at the end of the day, I'm going to choose with my wallet. So so you have to have all of the other aspects. It has to be the same quality. It has to be everything that's the same, and then it's sustainable. Okay, then maybe I'll buy that one.
Yeah, it's completely true. Like, you can philosophize about it all you want, but then think about it when you're next going grocery shopping, or when you're next going fashion, or you have a party coming up and you need to get a dress up outfit or something for Halloween. You're not going, okay, but where am I going to get this single one? You're like, I'm going to the party shop. I'm looking what I feel like I want to wear. What's my identity? What's my personality? Do I feel comfortable in this? These are the questions you're asking, not
Yeah,
where did this come from?
yeah,
Very
exactly. Yeah,
rare.
yeah. No, you want to have that funny glitter suit. That's the thing that you're looking
Yeah,
for.
if that's your vibe, that's your vibe. You're thinking
Yeah,
about that, and all the fashion companies are now going back to that argument. I mean, it's sad in a way, but it's also, I suppose it's all about the customer. It's all about, fast fashion in the 2000s. All of these guys were coming out and just basically being like, we are democratizing fashion, we are making fashion accessible, blah blah blah. And now everyone's again talking about, we allow, young people and different people to express their personalities, to
yeah,
everyone can express their personalities. Everyone should be able to be who they want to be and show that and whatever else. It's the same marketing again, 20 years later, but it
yeah,
still hits a chord because it's still kind of true at the same time as being bad for the planet and everything else. So you got to pick, and there's a whole discussion here, Jesse, about how you kind of shift the incentives. But yeah, I think the consumers can't be the ones who have to lead this change.
yeah,
But you can still put pressure on governments through highlighting certain issues. But industry and government has to work out a better system, and there has to be incentives towards that system. And I think if you do, like for example, in green energy, you can then basically become energy independent, reduce your costs, bring back industry, and be less vulnerable to wars, conflicts, other things like that. So there have to be arguments that are not environmental about it. Again, do it by mistake, do it in the background, in inverted commas, right? Like, oh no, but look at all the benefits for health and security and financial and whatever else. And like, well, actually, what we're doing is trying to save you guys, but let's not tell you.
yeah, yeah. Exactly. We have time for one more question. I found one that I think ends us on a nice positive note. It's this one by Layla, and she asks, "What inspired you to focus on sustainability within the textile industry?"
Nice question, Lena. So I had my epiphany during COVID, where my younger sister actually is the sustainable stalwart leader in our family, legend, and she does a lot of like rewilding in the UK and different things like that. I really enjoy business and like building up companies and operations, so mine had to be somewhere more in that world. And I was working at a fund in London, after having done a few things like before, and started looking into, actually read State of Fashion report by McKinsey. I'll give them credit, in 2019, and like it talked about fashion sustainability impact for like the first time, and I was like, Jesus Christ, like that's a lot. Like, I mean, at the time they're misquoting a fact that's now being proven wrong of like 8% of global emissions. It's a bit more like kind of 2 to 4 or whatever else, but it's still a big impact.
Yeah,
And basically, my philosophy is that every single system is not built right. We didn't build it for sustainability. We didn't build it to help the environment. We built it for convenience, profit, speed, quality, blah blah blah. And so I started looking into fashion. I like fashion. It's relatable if you're talking to your girlfriend, your family, your friends about what you actually do. As opposed to cement, which is actually 8% of global emissions, but probably wouldn't mean you have much fun at the party, or no one wants to really speak to you about that. And
I
so
think it depends on how gangster your family is.
yeah, exactly. You want to bury some people in cement. But yeah, so it was just kind of like, I want to be doing something that helps the planet, not hurts it. I believe this is the future, and it's a fascinating, crazy, big puzzle to try and solve. And sod it, let's start with fashion, because everything, all supply chains are screwed, and I see my world as staying in the supply chain. So why not start in this one? And yeah, it's you also get to meet some great characters in the textile industry, but I imagine that's the same with every industry. But there are some real characters for sure.
Good. That's lovely to hear, and you sound very enthusiastic about it. So I always admire that in people when they're like, yeah, they're really onto what they're doing, which is lovely.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Max, thank you so much for being on, because I know that you guys have this big event tomorrow. So it was all like a little bit tight and a little bit of a puzzle. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure
You're
having you on
welcome.
the show.
Thank you, Jesse. It was really fun chatting with you. And I'm looking forward to sharing a genuine coffee when I'm back in Amsterdam.
Yes, we will definitely do that. A real coffee at one of those snobbish places that we'll both like.
Yeah. Third wave coffee, baby. Let's go.
Good. Yeah, so if people want to check out Smartex, it's smartex.ai. That's an important one. If you like the show, you can see our episodes on automationcaffeine.com. Thank you for tuning in, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.